Okay, welcome everyone to Plant Delights Nursery at Juniper Level Botanic Garden, and welcome to our Gardening Unplugged series. Today we're going to talk about hardy corpse flowers. So we've certainly got those on our mind because we just flowered our giant Amorphophallus titanum less than a month ago, and hope some of you got a chance to see that. Of the genus, now the corpse flowers belong to a group called the aeroids, or the family Aeraceae. And that's an interesting group of plants. It involves a lot of our house plants. Philodendrons are in that, anthuriums are there, spathiphyllums, many common plants. We're more interested in the hardy versions, and most of those are what we call tuberous aeroids. So underground they have a, depending on who you talk to, a tuber or a corm. And let's actually get in a little shade. I think we can see better if we move over into the get out of the bright sun. So underground, these grow from a structure, which is this. And this sits dormant for the majority of the year. They don't emerge until June, and they go dormant right now. So trying to teach this class in September is a little dicey because some years they're up and looking great in mid-September, and some years they're already going to sleep. So this is what they do. They sit dormant and they have no roots during the wintertime. When they start growing, the roots are really interesting. Instead of coming out of the bottom like you would think, they actually come out of the top and they pull down. And they're called contractile roots because they actually will pull the tuber to the level that it wants to grow. Now when I was digging this, I actually cut the tuber in half. Was not being careful enough. But the interesting thing is, this is sort of like an Irish potato. If any of you have ever grown Irish potatoes, you can actually cut it into pieces and it will re-sprout. So you cut it, let it dry out, and then you can plant all those pieces. What happens during the course of a year is many of them will grow these long extensions. And I cut these off when I was digging today. And these, if you don't do anything underground, at the end of the season, these will die off and it will be left with the end. All that energy will actually go into the end and will form a little mini tuber. So next year, about 4 to 6 inches away, you will have another one pop up. And then the next year, another one. So over a period of time, some of the species will actually form large colonies. I've seen colonies as much as 6 to 8 foot across. So let's talk about some of the different species that we have. We right now have 15 hardy species of Amorphophallus. So Amorphophallus is a genus, so let me back up. For those that didn't study Latin, if you translate, amorphous means deformed, phallus means a part of the male anatomy, so it's basically a deformed penis plant, named after the flower. We like them. The flowers are fascinating, no question about it, but we love the foliage as well because it looks like a miniature palm tree in your garden. In terms of how to grow these, the majority of them will take anything from full sun for half a day to light shade. We actually find the majority of them grow a little better in at least half-day sun. You're going to get a much nicer plant. You won't see that mentioned anywhere online. The most common species is one called Amorphophallus konjac. And for those that they're into alternative medicines, konjac is actually sold in stores. It's sold online. It is a weight loss supplement. Now, if you've ever eaten a konjac tuber, it tastes like the flower smells, which would make anybody lose weight. It also has a lot of other medicinal properties. So you can actually search online for konjac and you will find konjac candies, you will find all kinds of amazing things. You have to know what you're doing when you're cooking because these have oxalic acid, which is something all the aeroids have. And oxalic acid is something that if you ate it, it would basically make your mouth feel like you just swallowed a bunch of broken glass. It crystallizes in your mouth. It also crystallizes in your fingers. So if you're sensitive and you handle this where it was cut, all of a sudden your fingers will start to burn. It's a fairly unpleasant thing. I can generally work with them if I'm washing seed for an hour or so before I start getting any burn, so I'm not particularly sensitive to these. So the hardiest of all is konjac. Konjac has the largest inflorescence of any hardy form of Amorphophallus, and it will grow as far north as Cincinnati, so zone 5B. It's pretty incredible. Now, depending on the selection, so when you grow them from seed, you get all kinds of variations. You'll get some that will be 5 foot tall in foliage and almost 5 foot tall in flower. You get others that will only be 1.5 foot tall in foliage. So the variation is tremendous in konjac. There's also a lot of variation in color of the stalk. We have one called black nightstick, which has a black stem. A typical konjac has sort of a mottled stem, sort of a gray and silver mottling. We have some now that have solid pink stems, so we're really getting some amazing colors. The other interesting variation with konjac is we have some with colored foliage. Like right now there's one called Gordon's Gold, and that comes out if you have an hour or two of sun. It is just beautiful gold all through the summer, and again, that's still looking pretty good in the gardens. The next hardiest species is one called albus. Albus is a much shorter plant, so I said konjac can get up to 4 to 5 feet. Albus never gets more than 1.5 foot, maybe 2 on a good day. It spreads a lot more. So if you plant one albus, in about 5 years, you're going to have a patch this big with probably 50 stems. That's grown commercially as a food in China. You'll find places where there's a lot of that. This plant I'm holding today is actually a hybrid between the two. So between albus and konjac, we call this Amorphophallus conbus. You don't get quite the interesting flower, but what's interesting is it delays the flower by a month. So konjac typically will flower in this area either last week of April, first week of May. Albus typically flowers a month and a half later. So the hybrid is sort of in between. So if konjac flowers too early for you, then conbus is a really nice thing that's intermediate where you don't lose the flowers to frost. The flower color is similar to konjac. It's a beautiful, beautiful purple. It feels like purple vinyl, but much shorter. The other interesting species, and probably third in hardiness, is one called Amorphophallus kiusianus. Kiusianus is mostly a solitary species, so while these two both offset, kiusianus, you have one, you will always have one. Now, the interesting difference, another difference, is these require 2 flowers to set seed. They cannot set on their own. They've got both male and female in the flower, but one is ready before the other one is ready. So you have to have 2 flowers. And what's interesting, when you have a patch of konjacs and they multiply, the plant knows when to open the first flower and when to hold the second flower, so that there's generally 2 days difference so they can cross. So nature is absolutely incredible about how they can figure that out. Kiusianus is self-fertile, so it's going to make seed regardless. You can't keep it from making seed. Now, seed on these seed stalks, generally about this tall, bright reddish orange, really amazing. Kiusianus is very different. It is pink. It is hot fluorescent pink, and it ages to blue. So if you're ever here for our summer open house, you will see all the kiusianus in fruit, and they are amazing. They're about this big. The seed heads start pink at the top, turn pink, and then they start turning blue, and they're just over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. It's really, you grow that as much for the fruit as you do for the flowers. The flowers on kiusianus are very short. They're only about this tall, but they're up on a very tall stalk. So those are the main 3. After that, in terms, I'm going to lay this down, in terms of hardiness, the next sort of tier down in hardiness is one called bulbifer. And we'll walk and see these in just a second. Bulbifer is very interesting because it's one of the only hardy species that forms bulbils on the leaf. So you will look at the leaf, and it looks like the leaf has got this horrible warty disease. And there will just be like these huge warts all over the leaf. Each one of those becomes a new plant. So at the end of the year, when those get big enough, they fall over and they fall onto the ground, and they will sit right there, and next spring they will sprout and come up, which is really a fascinating thing that it does. Other species, and we'll look at some today, and then sort of that next tier down, Amorphophallus thaiensis is one you really don't see, and that one flowers in summer, August and September. It's a small flower, sort of dinky compared to the others, but it's a very interesting plant. Simonianus, unionensis, uluensis. There's many other names. Henryi is probably another that's fairly hardy right there with bulbifer. And henryi is a dwarf species, never gets any taller than 1.5 feet. And the cool thing about that also is self-fertile, and it forms cobalt blue fruit. It's really amazing. Short stalk, but really quite incredible. So those are the main species that we have to work with in terms of finding some that are hardy. So let's take a quick walk, and we'll actually look at some of these in person. The ones that had the decency to stay up. So here's the first one I talked about. This is Amorphophallus konjac. This is fairly typical in color of the stems. And again, this will not come out of the ground. If you're going to have a flower, the flowers come out the last week of April, first week of May. If you're not going to have a flower, you will have no foliage, no stems, nothing till mid-June. So you've only got a short window it's out of the ground. Mid-June, mid-September, that is it. So the cool thing is you can plant other things around it, especially spring ephemerals that come up, do the whole thing, and then go dormant. And then the Amorphophallus comes up in the summer. So you basically have two plants in the very same place. So this patch has been in for probably a decade or so. Let's see, this was put in, well, 2000. So this has been in for 25 years. So this is how big the patch has got in that time. And like I say, you can have different cultivars, some offset very slowly, some offset very fast. This is about as tall as konjac is going to get. We have one that's a little bit taller. We're working on some variations that may have finer cut foliage, a little bit of difference in flower, but generally you see konjac, you know konjac. All right. Now I talked a little about the difference in stem color. Here's a konjac. And you see this is almost white with a few specks. If you grow them from seed, you get an incredible variation. And a lot of what we do, and we just actually had a blog about this in the last week, showed some of the pictures of some of the new things that we are coming up with, and hopefully we'll get those on the market soon. Now here is henryi that I mentioned, and that's a mature size of henryi. Some petioles are patterned, some are sort of a solid green. I thought I might find a stalk of berries, but I don't see one on this one this year. Now, typically, when an Amorphophallus flowers, that corm will not produce a leaf that year because it takes so much energy. The plant has to rest. Now, if you have a patch of them, others in the patch will produce them, but generally that corm that produces the flower will not produce any foliage that year. So if you have one that has an offset and you have a flower and then you don't see the foliage, you'll think, oh, well, it's dead. And then next year, here it comes back. Because what happens, Amorphophallus do something very interesting. The corm each year regenerates. So if you actually go in the wild and you dig one out in the middle of the season or do it in the ground, you will actually see it reforming. It starts with a little wart on the side and then it sucks the energy out. And so it moves a little bit each year because it's reforming. So it's fascinating, and each year, if it has good energy, so good leaf growth, the corm gets bigger and bigger. So many times you will have a flower every other year. If you're not getting much flowers, your plant's not getting enough light. So if you go 5 years and you haven't seen a flower, you're not getting enough light, therefore it's not producing enough energy. One of the odder ones we talked about is Amorphophallus thaiensis from Thailand, and that's what this is. It's not a very big species, and the flower's small, but this one flowers late summer and early fall. We've had them flower as late as fall open house. I don't see any flowers today. Flowers are small and they're white, and unlike things like konjac, which have a very strong aroma, this one has absolutely none. So not all Amorphophallus stink. Konjac smells pretty bad. Dunnii has absolutely no smell at all. Henryi is another one. Oh my God, that's the worst of all. That's like combining feces and urine together. It has just a really rough smell. Now up here is this is dunnii. This is one that we absolutely love, and dunnii is really neat because it has a beautiful whitish flower with red in the center. It's about this big. It looks like a clamshell. I've never detected a bit of scent on dunnii, so it's one of my favorites, but you don't see many people offering it. Now we've got a bulbifer over here I wanted to show you. As we walk by, here's another konjac. This is one we selected for black stems. So if you were here early in the year, it started to fade a little bit. The stems on this are actually jet black. And this is probably at least a decade old clump now. This was put in 2012, so 13 years old on that one. This one doesn't spread nearly as much as the konjac in the front. Now right over here, is Amorphophallus bulbifer. It's a fascinating plant. And if you can see up on top, you see the warts on the leaves. And so these warts, you can actually pop them off, and they look sort of like a nut, but don't eat them. And you just plant that, and that will grow. Now when you plant these, they will not come up until next June. Same if you plant seed. If you ever get seed, you plant them now, they will not come up till next June. The plant has its cycle, and you're not going to get it to change its cycle no matter what you do. It doesn't need cold. It just has a time. It says it's not time for me to come up yet. So it's a very interesting group of plants, but these will eventually, like I say, fall over. But this is certainly one of the taller species, this and Amorphophallus kraussii. This one also has a very strong smell of urine, very strong. So it's really, if you want something that has good fragrance, this, konjac, and henryi are really your three. They're actually much stronger than titanium. The titanium smell is nothing compared to those three, but that's the one that gets all the press with people going in with gas masks, etc. In terms of planting, you can plant them really any time. There's not a bad time. I would recommend putting them 3 to 6 inches deep. If you're from up north, I would get them probably 6 inches at least. They can freeze in the winter, they can freeze solid, and they're fine. But you would not want to leave them out in a container over our winter. I would say they'd probably be fine till upper to mid 20s, and then that would be a problem. The great thing about them, when you dig up those corms like I had up front or something like this, you can store this bone dry through the winter. The first Amorphophallus collector I ever met was a guy in Cary, North Carolina. This is back in the 80s. And he invited me over to see his collection. And this was after the fair, so this would have been November. So we walked into his house. He said, "Come back in my bedroom." I'm like, okay, this is weird. So we go back and he opens his dresser drawers and here's his underwear and his Amorphophallus bulbs and t-shirts, next row, and Amorphophallus bulbs. And they would just stay there all winter long. They need absolutely nothing. So from when you dig them up in 1st of October, if you were to dig them up, I don't know why he did, until June, they need absolutely nothing. And if you have one that is large enough to flower, something like a konjac or whatever, it will actually flower without any soil. It will flower in your dresser drawers. Okay. We had a lovely lady from up in New Jersey emailed us about a decade ago, and she said, "I'm 83 now and I'm looking to get rid of my Amorphophallus collection of konjacs." And she said, "It's given me great joy to play tricks on my husband," because she would leave them in the house until they flowered in spring. And he would come home and wonder where the dead animals were. And she would not tell him where she had her Amorphophallus. And he would go search the entire house trying to find it, and she got her jollies out of that. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. So it's a really interesting plant, not like anything else you'll grow. I sort of use it as the great revenge plant. When I worked for the state and left, I did not particularly, was not enamored with my boss, so I planted 16 outside his window at work. And so within 2 years after I left, he got a really great whiff in the spring. I'll stop here. Any questions on any of the voodoo lilies, konjac? We call them, actually, love lilies is more appropriate with the translation. So I think that gives a much better connotation than voodoo. Any questions?
Tony, if you had some of the temperate ones.
Yes.
I've been keeping mine in the pots, but you're saying I could just put them on a shelf.
Yes, absolutely. In the wintertime, yeah.
No water or anything, nothing.
Absolutely zero. That's one of the few plants that can totally dry down for literally 9 months. Needs absolutely nothing. Yeah. Just keep it, near or above freezing in the wintertime. Now, if you have something like titanium, which we flower, that has to stay in a pot and has to be watered all year. That one cannot, because that is not on the cycle that these hardy ones are. These hardy ones all have the same cycle. Grow for 3 months, sleep for 9. Great life. But not so the tropical ones. They're like, no. They have to stay in a container.
When they go down in the fall, you leave them alone until it totally comes off of the...
Yep. You leave them alone, and then the stem will just fall off the corm, and you just throw it away. Okay, any other questions? Thank y'all very much. I hope you enjoy growing some of these.